I'm Dorothy Barton. I was 17 when the war broke out, and at that time I was working in a shop in Bromley, a photographic shop where I worked in the office, adding up the till roll and writing letters and things like that. And a few months after the war broke out, I had a chance of a better job up in town, so I gave my notice in, and I moved up to the city, where I worked as a bookkeeper typist in a naval outfitters. They made naval officers' uniforms, and me and the other girl who worked there at that time were the only two females ever to have been employed by this firm. And we stayed there, I stayed there until the end of 1940, when I was going to be coming up to the age when I might be called up. And I didn't want to go into the army. I had several female cousins in the army who hated it, and I knew the RAF and the Navy wouldn't take me because my sight was so poor anyway, and I didn't know what else to do. So I was wandering round the back streets of the city one day, and I came across a shop with a big notice on the window which said recruiting office for the Women's Land Army. Now I had no idea whatever what this meant, so I went in and I signed up before I left, and I went home and told my parents, and they nearly went mad. They thought I was insane. When I thought about it, I thought I did think I was too, because I had no idea what working on a farm meant, having been born in town and worked in town. Anyway, I eventually got my uniform put through the post with several large parcels. Oh, before that, I had to have a medical, that's right, and I went to a local doctor and had a quick check over, and he said I was okay, and that was it, I was in. And then I had my uniform in several large parcels, and I tried these on, and my sister just fell about laughing when I showed her that they had sort of velveteen breeches, which were a bit baggy, green pullovers and cream shirts, and a sort of fawn pork pie hat. But the thing that made her laugh so much was the breeches, because they were very widely cut. And in those days I was very tall and very slim, and they just hung on me like sacks, and I couldn't wear them like that, so I cut the side seams off and made them narrower so they fitted me. The very first place I had to go to was a training farm just outside Sevenoaks, and there were a lot of other New Land girls there, and we were all stayed at a hostel and then went every day to a farm nearby where we had to learn to milk and clean the cows and wash them and brush them and milk them and sterilise the milk and then bottle it. And we started work at 5 o'clock in the morning. We got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, had a quick breakfast, then walked to the farm, started work at 5 o'clock. Came back about 8:30 for breakfast, back again to clean out the cow sheds and shovel up the muck and wheel it away in wheelbarrows, the muck heap, and we did that kind of thing until lunchtime. And then we had a couple of hours break for lunch, and then we started milking all over again in the afternoon, and this went on until about 5:30, so that was about 12 hours a day we worked, and we worked 7 days a week in that training month, with just 2 half days off in a month. And for that I got a postal order from headquarters for 8 shillings a week. That's 40p in today's money. They stopped the board and lodging at the hostel from my salary, which wasn't very much, and the remainder I got as pocket money, and that was 8 shillings a week. Right. After I finished training, I was a fully qualified milker. I went off to a temporary job for 6 months, and after that I was sent to a semi-permanent job in Tunbridge Wells, where another girl and I had complete charge of a small herd, where we did everything on the farm to do with the herd, and had a little flat in the farmhouse by ourselves. That was quite nice. We had every other weekend off alternately, so that one girl worked while the other girl went home. We worked that out between us. We could more or less do as we liked. And in the evenings, we just cycled round on our bikes or went to the pictures, or in the winter just stayed indoors and listened to the radio. But I did a lot of different kinds of jobs. I moved farms a great deal. And after about 2 years, I was asked to go to a hostel in Lenham that they were opening and leave dairy work and go and do something else. So I went to the hostel in Lenham, and I was sent to a farm on the first Monday morning, and when I got there I was told that I'd have to work in the fields with horses, an old man and his 2 horses, and it was absolutely wonderful. I did everything possible with those horses, ploughing and leading them up and down the fields, doing all kinds of things, haymaking, harvesting. Absolutely wonderful. And when the old man retired after about 2 years, the farmer couldn't find anyone else to take over the horses, so he sold them, and I had to go back to the hostel. As I hadn't got any specific job to do then, I went out with what they called the gang of girls, and we did whatever a farmer wanted us to do, like cutting down apple trees and burning them to clear the orchards, and sowing potatoes, or whatever needed a lot of work. And then I was asked to take up relief milking, which was whenever a girl anywhere in Kent was taken sick, the farmer would notify the hostel and I would be sent to take her place. So I went all over the place. I was once sent to Chevening Castle for a few weeks, while one of their girls had chickenpox. Right. Another temporary job I was sent to was to look after an old cart horse that had got out one night and stuffed himself full of oats and had colic, and was very, very sick indeed, and I had to go and look after him for a couple of months. And I had to do everything for him because he could barely stand. I cleaned him and gave him tablets and rubbed his legs with embrocation and gave him draughts and all kinds of things. Stand him in the pond to reduce the swelling of his leg by himself. So I had to stand better, and I went back to the hostel and continued working with the gang. The chief job I was sent to was at Tenterden in Kent, where the cowman fell off his bike on leaving the pub on Saturday night and broke several bones, and I was phoned for on Sunday morning to go and take over the small herd of cows. And while I was at this little farm in Tenterden, after a month or two, the war ended.
I'm Lil Murrell, and when the war broke out I was working in a factory which was making wooden boxes for the markets like Borough Market and Covent Garden for the fruit and vegetables. It also had a sack factory as well, and twice when the bomb started falling, it was bombed and caught fire. So you can imagine what the wood was like. Not only was it burning, but by the time they put it out, most of it was soaking wet. This was the first time it was bombed. The second time it was bombed was 6 weeks later, and the governor decided that he wasn't going to open up the factory a second time. He would move out into the country. And so we moved to Bexley in Kent, and I naturally went with them, with a lot of the other workers, and we used to go down on the back of an open lorry down what was then the Rochester Way, now the M2, every morning, and then later on we had monthly passes on the train, and we used to stand at New Cross station hoping that the train would come in that we wanted, if there wasn't an air raid, if it wasn't raining or foggy or whatever in the winter. This went on all through the war, and then later on I was about to be conscripted, and I went for an interview, and they, after passing, they said, "What would you like to do?" And I said, "I'd like to be a nurse." And they said, "Yes, okay." And then after they'd got it all decided, they looked at the paper at the job I was doing and said, "Sorry, you're in a reserve occupation, you can't go." And so for the rest of the war, I stayed in this factory making things that went for the Covent Garden markets.
I'm Margaret Kippin. I was 20 years old when war was declared, and my first thought was I wanted to join the forces. I came from a service family, and I thought, right. But my parents were very, very much against this, and of course we did take note of what our parents said, though. I had 3 brothers going into the services, and the argument was, well, you're the girl, you should stay at home with Mum. And of course we gave in. So I was working at the Electric Light Company, which again was reserved occupation. But on the first Saturday of the Blitz, it was bombed. And we had to move out of London a bit, walk to work, walk home, get lifts where we could. And then Black Maria once gave us a lift home, so all the neighbours pulled their curtains. However, eventually, my mother and a younger brother were evacuated. My other 2 brothers were called up, and my father was sleeping up in town. And although I had, for about a month, I was looking after my 2 brothers, the house was going to be empty. So the decision was that I shouldn't stay in the house on my own. And an uncle who lived in Tunbridge Wells suggested I'd go down there and he would, get me a job. So I worked in the civil service there, where we did quite a bit of war work, because we had, if there was enemy action locally, the lines, telephone lines, had to be rerouted to the army, because there was a lot of army secret service stuff going on around there. And one of my jobs actually was to mark out on a map where the new lines were going to be. Because another thing we did down there, we used to work in the forces canteens, and fire watching. Well, then my parents moved back to Surbiton, and I was going to get married. I was engaged to be married, and I went home to live with my mother. So I went down to ask what I could do in the way of war work. Because I'd moved away from Tunbridge Wells, it got me out of that. So I was sent to a government training centre and taught how to read a vernier, use a micrometer. But the first 2 or 3 days, we just filed a little steel block, to get it square. And I was then, after I finished my training, it was decided I'd go into the inspection side, you see. And I was sent to a factory at Walton-on-Thames, which was a factory that was being converted garage with a horrible corrugated roof, 1 toilet between the whole factory. The conditions were pretty primitive, and we worked for quite long hours, often all night, and often 6 o'clock in the morning. I had to leave home at 5:15 to get a train to work, so it was a bit grim. But so I stayed there for a while and then went to Parnell Aircraft. And then I became pregnant. I got married first, I must add. And after I became pregnant, so when I was 6 months pregnant, I gave up. So then I became a mum, looking after a baby during the war and all that entailed. Like, as we were saying, learning how to change washers, mend fuses, and when I had my windows blown out by bomb blast, I had to clear up all the mess and get the maintenance done.